So you've got the pleasure or unpleasure, depending on how you look at it, of me through to the break and lunch. So I'm the only thing that's standing in your way. But please do bear with me. I do promise to try and keep you at least entertained, if not informed. But we're going to talk about robotics and what's happening in the world of robotics and whether robots will finally overtake humans in hospitality. So it's an interesting area that I'm really, really fascinated by, not just at a kind of pure operational level, but at a much broader level of thinking intellectually about the whole concept of humanity, really, and thinking anthropologically about whether as humans we're ready for a world of robots or not. So that's where we're going to head for the next 15 minutes or so. So just a quick background on me. I've been in hospitality my whole life. My parents ran restaurants and hotels and a bakery. I went to study law, hated it with a passion. Apologies to any lawyers out there. I dropped out, went to work at this fantastic hotel in Scotland called Gleneagles, which is very close to my current home. If you've not been, come to Scotland. We've got an incredible culinary scheme there. And since then, been working as a consultant, executive, and right now I'm working with MAPAL Group as the Chief Marketing Officer. So we're a technology business, which I'll come on to in a little while. I own a Better Kebab brand, which is on the bottom right. A selfish plug. If anyone's looking for a fantastic kebab brand in the Middle East, we're currently talking. So David Singleton or I, happy to chat with you on that. And also run a consultancy business called Think Hospitality. So does anyone know the Jetsons? So who knows the Jetsons? I'm going to play it, the little video. Oh, there's no sound. That's a shame.
Coming up, milk, cereal, crunchy or silent? Better make it silent.
And some bacon.
Bacon.
And one soft-boiled egg.
And one soft-boiled egg.
Thanks, Mom.
So does anyone know the Jetsons now? Raise your hand if you know this cartoon. Quite a few of you. There we go. So any guesses from the audience of how old the Jetsons is? Yeah, it's between 50 and 60 years old. Like the amount of people that say, oh, it must be about 30. And it's like, no, it's 60. The reason I put this up here is that let's put aside the absolute horrendous connotation that a young boy would need his mother to use the machine to get his food, because I think that that's awful. But let's put aside that and let's think about the fact that 60 years ago, we had a perception that food would eventually come from a machine and that someone would be making food. If you'd have asked people 60 years ago, I'm absolutely certain they would have said that by now, this would be our reality. So this was actually set 2 years ago. So when they were thinking about the Jetsons and when it was set in its timescale, it was 2 years ago. So this is what the world we thought of and the world was going to be. What's really interesting with this, and the reason I raise it, is that science fiction and our ability to imagine actually helps to define our future. So people actually are considering and think, when you think within the confines of technology, we know there's a whole load of work which suggests that it's directly linked to what we were influenced by as children. So damn sure there are people out there that when they were building kiosks and automated kiosks were thinking of this. Who's a Star Trek fan? Few of you, very few of you actually admitting to that. A few Trekkies out there somewhere.
Far more advanced to water, cold. I saw a similar device on a Tarkalian vessel. It was capable of replicating almost any inanimate object.
If we had one of these in engineering, we could make all the spare parts we need. I wonder what else is on the menu. One pan-fried catfish.
You can tell it's American because he's ordering catfish.
Smells like the real thing.
I think the reason that I wanted to show this was, again, the science fiction thing on one part, but what's really interesting is that the writers of this decided that they would go from talking about the water to talking about building tools, and then it went straight back to food. And I do think, as I come on through to the presentation, as a society and biologically, as humans, we know that we all need to eat food, right? That's undeniable. That's basic science. But what's interesting much more than that for me is that we actually have a society where we know that there's a whole piece within our psychology which suggests that it's absolutely integral to us to eat and to eat together. And I think that there's a really interesting element that almost by nature, we go back to food as a basic instinct. And it's one of the things that I think when we come to think about how technology plays a part in our sector is really important to consider. Because again, it's not just the operations, it's not just the pure perceived customer experience, but it's actually about the psychology and the experience that you make. So let's go back to here. Has anyone eaten a fully automated pizza? I've eaten a fully automated pizza, and it's not bad. I'm not going to name any brands, but I would say it's on par with some of the brands that we would order takeaway from, and it is completely automated. And this is probably the first example of, I'm not saying commonplace, the fact that no one here has eaten a fully automated pizza suggests it's not entirely commonplace, but this is in existence, and it's been in existence for a few years, and this is already being used in settings like hospitals, and situations where you need hot food out with operating hours that would make sense commercially. So there's a really interesting example there. And I think this is almost, we know that pizza is almost a commodity. You can buy it in almost any location from retail, so on. And I think that we're going to see this become far, far more prolific in the coming years. If we think back to that Star Trek piece, what do we see there? The idea of that someone scanning and suddenly something appears. Well, I mean, for all intensive purposes, this isn't that far off. The idea that you can 3D print food. Has anyone eaten 3D printed meat? Yep, a few of us. So you can 3D print meat in two ways. You can either use lab-grown meat, which means that it is actually meat, but it removes the whole ethical question as to whether or not, whether you should or shouldn't be eating meat. And there's an interesting question there as to whether a vegan will eat or won't eat the meat that comes from one of these machines. Or secondly, you can do a plant-based alternative that tastes really interesting, but it's an interesting whole question. And again, this is reality. So this is happening right now. This isn't the future, but what will be clear into the future is that we will be doing more of this, and I think that there will be a whole piece of transition towards 3D printing, but in a much bigger manufacturing-based setting. Is anyone wearing an iWatch or any of the equivalents? There's got to be more of you wearing this right now. No? Less. Okay, so more of you have eaten lab-based meat than are currently wearing an iWatch. I'm sure that Apple aren't happy with that. But we know that this is, again, a standard, relatively common piece of technology. What you might not know is that there are players in the US, insurance companies, for instance, that are allowing you to determine your health insurance and your health cover and how much you pay for it based on connecting yourself into their technology and sharing your data with that provider. So they will then determine can determine all your key vitals from that device, and also there's a move towards calorie intake and so on and so forth. So it's an interesting question, and I've sat in a presentation from someone in a large UK-based insurance company that suggested that if everybody had one of these watches and we all knew that we were eating badly, we would no longer eat badly. And I think that it suggests that the naivety of some people in terms of their understanding of the human psyche, because damn sure I know that a donut's not healthy for me, but I'm going to eat a donut. If I go out there in about 5 to 10 minutes' time when I'm finished, I'm sure a number of you are going to be chomping into dessert, knowing full well that you may have to go to the gym to burn that off later. So it's an interesting piece about psychology again, that just because technology can do something doesn't mean that as humans we're going to let it do that. And almost certainly the influence isn't absolute. So this is Spice. Spice was produced, a company based in the US. It's from a number of ex-students from MIT, and this was in Boston, and it was, they positioned it as being the first automated restaurant. As you can see, there's a person there. What's really interesting in the story of Spice is that they actually had to add people into the operation because people didn't like being in environments that there weren't people, funnily enough. So it's fascinating to consider that they built something that on an operational and technical level could deliver food to the end consumer, and then had to have humans finishing it off to make it palatable to the end consumer. So a really interesting question, point. Does anyone know what happened to Spice a few months ago? No? So Spice was sold, and Spice sold to Sweetgreens because, and they closed this store. So anyone going to the US, I reckon in 6 to 12 months into a Sweetgreens, damn sure you're going to see this operation and the robotics become standardized in their operation. And I think it's probably the first large-scale chain that will have standardized robotics of this kind in the kitchen, which will be a really interesting really interesting thing to see. This is, everyone will have probably seen this. I think in a previous iteration of FHS, there was one of these. They are, I think, it's a little bit, well, how do I say this politely? It's not particularly effective operationally. The reality is that it's a bit clunky. It's kind of cool. People like the idea. It's a little bit of a fad. But I do think the idea of robotic arms, and the reason I put it here, is that we can't get our heads out of the idea that a robot needs to look like us. So the humanization, the way we've always seen robotics, is that they look like humans. So this has got an arm because we've got an arm. What I would question and challenge is to the reality in the future of whether we're actually going to see robots looking like us and looking like this, because it doesn't make the most sense. The reality is that all we're trying to do is reproduce something that we can physically do rather than producing it in the most optimal way. So not to say that those people who are investing in this, they're not going to get a return, because I think that there's a lot more opportunity for people to be doing this kind of stuff. I think this one's on a cruise ship, but I'm not sure that's going to be the absolute future. This is in Billund, which is where Lego House is, the home of Lego in Denmark. This is called Mini Chefs. It's about 5 or 6 years old. This is an example where they've used robotics to create some theatre in the restaurant. The robots aren't actually doing much other than the fact that they're there and they are helping to add to the experience, but an example of how technology can really deliver on an experience in the right setting. So is Ben here? Ben's on stage later. No, he's gone. Obviously, I'm not that interesting. So this is Ben's concept, and Ben's recently opened in Riyadh on Friday, and he's going to be talking a little bit later about the fast, fine, casual piece, so I'm not going to go into that too much. This is Taco Bell. This was one of the absolute really interesting elements of their drive through the future concept, reducing labour, making it so that the kitchens are above and it can come down in chutes to reduce the number of people required. And it would be remiss of me not to talk about McDonald's. McDonald's as an organisation is probably the one we expect to be the most forward in terms of utilising robotics and technology, and they don't disappoint. They obviously drove the kiosk revolution. They are using in-store robots in terms of busing. They've got some fantastic and really interesting work happening in the US right now about less people in stores and fully automated stores. There's, I think this one's in Texas. But fascinating to me, their CEO at the end of last year came out and said, there's a lot of interest around what you can do with automation. We've spent a lot of money, effort looking at this. If there's one company that can spend a lot of money and effort looking at technology, it's McDonald's. And there is going to be no silver bullet. that goes and addresses this for the industry. And I think that this was a very, very clear statement to his shareholders to say, we know that you're expecting us to go almost entirely labourless, peopleless, but it ain't coming anytime soon. If you've got the CEO of the largest multi-site restaurant group in the world telling you that this isn't going to happen anytime soon, it probably isn't going to happen anytime soon. And I want to discover why. Where does technology really have a place? Well, the two that everybody talks about are cost saving and customer service, customer experience building. I think we heard this morning. We think there's a whole piece about improving team happiness and well-being to be played into that mix too. And they're the three things that we think are most important. There is a longer list: improving guest experience, rewarding loyalty, increasing spend, managing costs, streamlining processes, understanding and engaging customers and engaging teams. But we need to think much broader in terms of the landscape of what's happening and how this is impacting. So I do think that where we will see a lot more use of robotics, and this is damn sure going to happen in terms of technology, is ironically, in a post-pandemic world, we're seeing an increased urbanization. What we're seeing is the biggest growth of urbanization is coming in mid-size, not large cities, mid-size cities. So people moving out of very large cities towards secondary cities. But it's still happening, and I think that what that will mean is as we continue to see urbanization and people pulling into closer and closer proximity, the opportunity to be able to invest in technology and expensive technology because you're making more revenue creates an opportunity. The challenge actually within technology is that there's a high cost of trial and a high cost of development and research, which means that the reality is you need venues that have got large and deep pockets to be able to make that leap so that others can follow. There's the whole safe at home piece, Netflix and chill. We know that this is going to continue. We saw it happen through COVID. Yes, everyone's out, and we've heard this morning, bouncing back, but there will be a continuation of people dining at home and a resurgence of this. And one risk for our sector is, as robotics and automation continues, how much are we going to see a reduction but through people being able to have better quality food at home quickly? If I had an automated pizza machine at home and it was relatively cost effective, would I be more inclined to do that than ordering a Domino's? Question mark. There's a health consciousness. We've heard this morning. It's growing. Put aside my question about donuts earlier, but there is a growing health consciousness, and I think that, again, that we tend to find that recipes that are very health conscious and the types of food that we're seeing associated with health consciousness, as I saw with the salad piece, are much easier to be able to deliver with automation, which is interesting. And the whole entertainment piece, I mean, this is for the most part quite technology driven, and I think it's where we will see technology driven fad type experience building rather than necessarily something that's absolutely driving operational efficiency. So we can see that coming. The last big piece I want to talk about is automation, and automation in terms of the broader industry, not just our industry, because what this will lead to for sure, and we put here a Tesla truck, is releasing human capital from other industries. So we know that we've got a pinch point at the moment globally around human capital and talent and hospitality. There's an opportunity here in the midterm for us to be able to really own and position ourselves as a sector of choice. But that requires a lot of work and working together, because what I think we need to focus on is where humans add value and use these automation and technology and robotics to be able to remove the laborious tasks that no one wants to do. And that's where we should be focusing our effort. Responsible consumerism, the whole sustainability piece is not going away. We've got one planet. I think that hopefully everybody here is on the journey. I do think that there's been a huge distraction since COVID towards this journey, and I think that technology and data is the answer to this, and let's hope that we're seeing more and more work towards it. We've heard about this we've heard about it this morning, really. There's a greater divergence between convenience and experience. And I guess to me, my question is, where are people more inclined and willing to accept technology and robotics? I think that what we know is that they're more inclined to accept it in a convenience location, and that within an experience location, it needs to be more invisible and sensor-based. This is I Am Donna. We actually were one of the first UK businesses in 2018-19 to go entirely labour-free front of house. And it was a really interesting point. But what we have done is really doubled down on creating viewpoints into the kitchen so that you can see people, and there's still people really visible within our front of house environment, albeit producing your food. But that whole idea of not being able to see people, I think, is a really interesting question, because I don't think that it floats for many people. I'm going to end on this. This is Hanna-Barbera, another cartoon, Flintstones. I'm sure you've all seen the Flintstones before. The reason I'm ending on this is I started on the Jetsons, which was their futuristic piece. This was their piece going back to prehistory. And this is my point about anthropology. I do think that as human beings, we seek human connection. We seek to eat with other people. It's part of our basic DNA, fundamentally, that that whole societal piece of eating together. And I do think that as we see technology in all the rest of our lives develop and increase, and we can see around the room how many people are on the iPhones right now as they all look up, what we really see at that point is that as we become more and more integrated into this digital world, we will be seeking human and human touch more and more. And I personally think, and at MAPAL we think, that investing in human capital and really investing in creating fantastic places to work is the way the way that this is going to move, particularly within experience occasions. But from our perspective, you need to absolutely map your customer journey and your employee life cycle journey and understand where you're willing and where is right to consider technology and robotics. And from our perspective, we do three things. We help with productivity and processes, we work with business intelligence, and we help with people and culture. Within this region, all of our work is around the people and culture with learning management and engagement tool. My colleague Sheila's in the audience here, so wave Sheila. If you want to come chat with us about any of this, feel free at the break. But thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with us right through to lunch. I'll see you in 1 hour. Thanks.